Okay. If anybody has a Bible and they'd like to follow along, we're going to be in Luke chapter 6 today. Everybody in this room, I guess some of us might look at ourselves and say, well, we've built a life. That's true to some extent, I suppose. But really, every human being of any age is building a life. Even if it's a life that, like your friend Lottie, that's taking dialysis and is really not in good health, that life is still being built. We're all building our lives. And it seems to me that some of the teaching that floats about today has to do with the idea that somehow this life that we're building should be a life that's easy. I like easy, personally. I'm really in favor of easy. But as a New Testament follower of Jesus, I don't know that that's necessarily what the New Testament would show us. Paul says to Timothy, this young pastor in Ephesus, he says, yes, all who desire to live a godly life will suffer persecution. Now, persecution, when he said that, meant something very specific, but I'm not so certain that we shouldn't look at all of the things that come into our lives that take us away from our ability to follow Jesus as a measure of persecution in some sense, whether it be health or body or financial or whatever it is. Think about it this way before we look at our text. I know it's a long preamble. Sorry about that. A Steinway grand piano. That's a 9-foot piano. Yeah. How about a Bosendorfer? They're 11 feet long. They've got an extra half octave at the bottom. The Steinway has underneath, the reason for that shape is there's a big piece of metal under there inside that odd-shaped box. It's called the harp. That's what it's shaped like, is the harp. And all of the strings are pulled to tension on that harp. And when you pull a piano to an A440 tension all the way across the keyboards, there is 40,000 pounds of pressure on that harp. And out of all that pressure, all that beautiful sound comes out. There's something to this life wherein things don't go the way we'd like, and that God is using it to do something great in every person. Let's take a look at this text. I'll begin reading in verse 46, some of the most penetrating words Jesus ever speaks. Speaking to the people who are listening, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? I'll show you what that person is like. That's like someone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them in practice. A person who builds a house, who digs deep and lays a foundation on rock. When a flood comes and the torrent strikes the house stands because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not do them or put them into practice is like someone who builds a house on ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent strikes the house collapses and its destruction is complete. Now, this metaphor is obvious to me. I think everybody understands it. If we're going to build a life, then we build it on the rock of who Jesus is and what He calls us to do and be, or we're building on sand. I understand that. For the Middle Easterner, though, this would have meant a lot more, because in the Middle East, concomitant with our California, it occurs to me, I was sitting across from the person who was teaching the small church seminar I went to a couple of weeks ago, and he was from California. And I looked at him and I said, it's interesting to me about California is if you take it and spin it around so that it curves this way, its topography and its climate is just like Israel. Just like it. You've got the northern section that's very verdant, very green, and it gets sufficient rain. You've got the middle area that's mountainous, and it gets some rain, but a lot of the water available is from snowcap. And then you've got the southern part of California and Israel that is a desert. Well, Jesus is speaking to the Middle Easterners here, and they would have understood this metaphor so much better than we do. I've dug a lot of foundations in South Georgia, and it's easy digging here. You stick a shovel in the ground, you get a shovel load just about every time unless you hit a root. It's not so in the Middle East where Jesus is. When they would build a house with hand tools, they would have to hew the foundation in rock because everything's covered with rock. But there are these big expanses of land called wadis. You have them in California, you have them in Arizona, in the southern part of Arizona, you have them in the Middle East, in the southern part of Israel. The wadi is a place where water flows when it rains in a desertified area. Well, the wadi is great. I mean, if you want to dig a foundation, you can go out there with hand tools and just dig a real fine one in a hurry and put your house on it. The problem is, sooner or later, it might take 5 years, might take 5 months, might take 20 years, that wadi's going to be a floodplain. And the water's going to rush there because all the waters in the desert concentrate in these wadis. Some of them are 100 yards wide. Some of them you could just jump across. But Jesus is painting the picture and saying you could go out into a wadi and you could build a house really easy. It's easy to build out there because you can just dig your foundation, stack your rocks, put your roof on, and you're in. But if you build a house on a rock, it's going to be hard because the work to build a house on rock in that part of the country is very hard. And you have to realize, too, these are people doing this with hand tools. I remember when I was in Pennsylvania, it's not like here. I was working at this one guy's house. I used to do a lot of basement remodeling where we don't have basements here. If you had a basement here, it'd be underwater. But up there, they have basements. And I mean full 8-foot ceiling basements. And a lot of what I did was I would turn basements into living space. And this was one of those jobs. And in the middle of this basement, the stairwell that came down from the kitchen into the basement, there was this big thing. It was shaped like an eyeball. And it was about this high, about waist high. It had bricks laid all around the edges with a border and a nice concrete smooth top. And so I was in there working one day and I said to my friend who was working for, I said, "What is that thing?" He said, "That's a rock that was there. They couldn't move it when they dug the basement, so they just left it there." Now, I remember digging foundations in Pennsylvania by hand. We did them by hand because we were a small builder. You're building additions, you just need a ditch. And it was nothing to get one shovel load, and the next time it was clink, and you knew there was a rock. Now, it might be the size of a lemon, might be the size of a watermelon. It might be a rock that you had to go get tools and cut through it to finish the foundation because you couldn't move it. That's what Jesus is alluding to here. He's saying, look, you can go into the really easy place in the wadi and build a house easily. But if the waters come, that house will not stand. But if you put it on a rock, it will stand. Now, Jesus asks of us, I think this is the most penetrating verse that Jesus speaks in all of the Bible as it speaks to us. Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? I mean, that's a terrible question. I would give anything if that weren't there. Being a Christian would be so much easier if I didn't see a passage like that. But there it is. What's the matter with us? We call him Lord, but he's looking right at you and me and saying, but a lot of the time we choose to not do what he says. Why is that? Well, there's a lot going on, right? We've got all kinds of pulls. TVs, when I was growing up, if you had a 19-incher, you had a big TV. You had a 25, one of those big Curtis Mathis things that sat in a big wood cabinet. You really had a big TV. Well, now you put a 25-inch in your workshop to watch while you're doing something else. I mean, everybody's TV is going to just get, pretty soon you carry them like this because they're so big. Or you get somebody on the other end of it to help you carry it in. There's a lot going on in our lives where we can kind of pick and choose every minute of the day that we're not doing something that's necessarily mandatory, like bathing or sleeping or making a living. We can make all kinds of choices. And it's hard, I think, for us to make choices that God calls us to make. I don't think those are easy because usually they're going to be costly in some way. Either our time, our energy, our money, or all three. And we're so trapped by time that these things that we can do, that we can choose, pull at us constantly. One of the aspects in dealing with unbelievers, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but of the 35 or so that I deal with on a daily basis, they say to me, and this is a hard argument to counter, why do I want to take that on? I like my life. I don't have to, Sunday morning, I don't wake up and feel like I've got to do anything at all. Right? Why do I want to take that on? Why do I want to take on having to worry about the poor or having to worry about my neighbor? Why? I like my life the way it is. And heaven, who cares about that? I'm 24 years old. Heaven's way out there. I don't need to think about that. Death is something so far away from people in most, and even we who sit here, we're a little closer to it, most of us in here. Jesse's not, but the rest of us are. And for us, it's still way off out there. Really? We don't stop and sit down every morning when we wake up at breakfast and think, I wonder if I'll die today. We don't think like that. Jesus looked at the Pharisees and he called them hypocrites. Now that's a harsh thing, but people say to me, I don't want to come to church because of all the hypocrites. And I say in there, and I say, you know, you're right, I'm one of them. That's why I came to Jesus to start with, because I am a hypocrite. That's why I'm here. But the Pharisees wore their religion on their sleeves. Everybody could see it. Remember a couple of weeks ago I mentioned to you that when they would fast, on the mandatory fasts that they had every week, they would put chalk on their face like makeup. So when they walked the streets, everybody would say, look at him, he's fasting. To look poorly, so that they would show up in the streets as suffering for the Lord. They saw God as God. They would be in this camp of, why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? But they didn't live in all the spheres of their life as though he was God. They didn't worry about justice and mercy, as Jesus said, the weightier matters. They just worried about making sure that when they shook cumin on their food, they took a pinch, a tenth of that, and set it aside as a tithe. That's how careful they were. But they didn't worry about the poor, and they didn't worry about the lepers, and they didn't worry about the prostitutes or anybody else. So here we sit, and we see the church culture as, look, we just got to be honest here. This is, for better or worse, this is our greatest singular expression of who we are as believers, is it not? Is there anything really else that we can do? I mean, I guess we could sell everything and move to Chad, if God so calls you. But this is the expression, being here. And yet, let's just be really honest, it's an inconvenience. Is it not? I mean, let's be fair and honest. It's an inconvenience. It takes gasoline. It takes time. We have to get out of bed earlier than we might like. We have to sit through a boring sermon for 25 minutes on a Sunday, or a droll Sunday school class, or whatever's going on. I mean, that's the way it is. Yeah, we can get an Oreo or something back there, but I mean, it's still, I got to sit there. I got to earn my Oreo by sitting here for 2 hours. Tiredness, our lives, our health, all kinds of things interfere with us making this common expression. But this is the place where we're learning to be disciples. I grew up in a household where it was conveyed to me in the most clear terms possible by my parents. They hated to have to go to church. They hated it. So by the time I was old enough to say I don't have to go anymore, I didn't go. I didn't care about it. And the reason was because I knew they didn't believe anything that was happening there. They didn't believe it. They just went because they were afraid my grandparents would be upset with them for not having the children in church. This is the place where we are accountable to each other. This is the place where if you see me doing something that you know I shouldn't be doing, or saying what I shouldn't say, or whatever, you have the occasion to call me out, because we're part of this gathering. But it is, I'll never forget this growing up. My mother used to say this every Sunday. It was like a mantra. I can worship God anywhere. I don't want to have to go and get all dressed up again on a Sunday and go to church. Which our church is one of those where you wore a suit and your very best clothing to church, which I hated. There was no air conditioning. I can imagine a 10-year-old in a 3-piece suit and no air conditioning in the balcony. But that's and we had the windows open so wasps came in while you're sitting there, At least then I guess the wasps gave me something to do. I could watch the wasp. But it's always easier to not come. That is always the easier. I'm here on Sunday, but it'd be easier not to come. That's just how it is. Jesus isn't talking about these things, though. When he says this, he's talking about something a little different than maybe we might think. We think about living for Jesus in all of these realms of doing. Jesus is talking about something else here. He's talking about being. He is talking about us bringing a general attitude toward our discipleship that is very, very different from the attitude that we would naturally be able to bring. And he uses the metaphor of resisting a flood to make the case. Now in Matthew expands on this little text and makes it much bigger. And so I want to take Matthew's version of it and take each one of the portions of it. Matthew describes three things. He says rain, flood, and wind as the things that would beat against the house. So I want to take each one of those and just take a minute and look at them. The rain. What is it about rain that would say to us it's something to be endured? I remember I worked in this house where they had a sink, and in Pennsylvania, Dennis can relate to this, for a long time in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, they used what are known as polybutylene risers. From the little valve under the sink up to the sink valve, it was a gray plastic piece of polybutylene. And they eventually recalled all that. You know why? Because they'd pop out. You'd be laying in bed at night and the thing would pop out of the hot water side of the thing, and you'd just have hot water spraying in that sink all night while you slept. This happened a lot. Well, I worked in a lady's house where it had happened. And they came downstairs from the bathroom sink upstairs. The polybutylene had popped, and when they came downstairs, the ceiling was about this high off the ground, where a sheetrock had come down, was just bulging with who knows how many gallons of water sitting above the sheetrock. She said, water is so insidious, it gets into everything. And it does. That's the way rain is. When you've got something of value in the rain, the water's going to get into everything. Do we look at our lives and say, I am relying on Jesus in everything, such that when the rains do get into my life, I'm built on a rock? That's what he's asking us. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking. Then you got floods. Here's the most amazing thing to me about being a Christian. I have never understood this. I've been a Christian for 35 years. I still don't understand it. We're sitting in here. Let's say, now maybe not today. I don't know. You'll have to think about that for yourself. But maybe you come in here, or I come in here, and God does something really amazing in our thinking. Somehow we come to church and we find ourselves really lifted up by the service, lifted up by something somebody says to us. And we go through the service and we leave here on Sunday and we think, wow, what a great time. And then the alarm clock goes off Monday morning. We're right back to the same old stuff. It's like all that happened just evaporates and Monday morning floods in. Or Sunday and we wake up Monday and all of a sudden something's really wrong with us and we wind up in the hospital. Or somebody we love winds up in a car wreck. Something just suddenly floods into our lives, and Jesus is saying, these things are going to happen. The floods will come. The rain will come. But if I've founded myself on Jesus, they won't tear us down. They'll hurt, but they won't remove us from the earth. Then you got the wind. I would say this, and this again is Matthew's way of telling this sermon that Jesus gives. The wind strikes me as something that is very sudden and unseen. Floods you can see, rain you can see. I mean, rain gradually builds up. Floods can sometimes do that. But wind isn't like that. You just look out there, you don't see wind. All you see is the effect. So a wind is something that just shoots in out of nowhere. I see this as kind of like what our enemy does to us. You know, God's got an enemy who's really active. Satan just shows up and does stuff. We don't even know what's going on. I would say this, if God removed his protection from each one of us in this room, we wouldn't last very long. We wouldn't last very long. And it's hard to discern, isn't it? Because he shows up. He doesn't show up like this monster smelling of sulfur, all scary and roaring, and something you'd as fast as you could go the other direction if you saw him. It's not like that. He shows up most of the time in a way that says, wow, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good to me. I think I'll try that. And it's really hard to discern. I think about it in terms of doubt. Anybody who says that they never ever doubt that God is for them, I want to meet that person. Anybody who goes through something and never ever has that moment that says, does God really care about what I'm facing? Now maybe we've never faced anything that got us quite that far along. But the flood will come. The wind will come. And there'll be a moment where we say, how can I believe that God cares about me in this moment? I think the hospital faces us with that. And then you've got, finally, death. I mean, good grief. That's a really big one, kind of an irremediable problem once you're dead. And it's going to test all of us to that ultimate degree. It's the ultimate rain, flood, and wind. And it's a mystery we don't know anything about. Who in this room can tell me anything about death? I want to talk to you after the service. I've never been there myself. I don't have a clue what that's like. What's it even like to die? I don't know. And it will test the foundations. And if they're built in the wadi, you'll be washed away. I'll be washed away. But Jesus is telling us something so good here. He's saying, if you will build on me, death won't even wash you away, won't wash me away. That hymn, when the death dew lies cold upon my brow, it is then, if ever I needed thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. That's when we're all going to face that if Jesus doesn't come back. Could it be that God is readying us for that ultimate test? I think so. And are we up for being ready? It's hard. It's like an athletic contest. You've got to put in every day. Submit ourselves to that being readied every day. How much readying are we willing to walk through before we're ready? I don't have a clue. I can't even say that for myself. I don't know. C.S. Lewis says it this way. He uses an example. He says, I hated when I had a toothache. Now, everybody hates a toothache. But what he hated worse than the toothache was, he said, I knew if it just didn't go away, I was going to have to go and wake my mom up. And when I woke my mom up, I was in for the full treatment. I'm headed for the dentist, no questions asked. Because that's the only way the toothache can stop. Jesus is working on you and me to build us into temples that are fit for His use here and fit to live with Him forever in heaven. And there is nothing that will teach us endurance except enduring. Nothing. I hate that. I just tell you honestly, I don't like it. I don't like enduring anything. Do you? I don't like enduring what's happening in my family right now. However enticing, though, the things that might be that would draw us away from standing and building a house on a rock, one day for sure, we're going to face Him. Are you looking forward? Am I looking forward to facing Him as a welcome friend? Or are we worried about that a little bit? A lot of people are worried. I love the songwriter. When they lay me down for the last time, and I say goodbye to all my friends, I know whose hands I'll be looking for because it's the beginning, not the end. I hope we can all say that. That's who He wants to be. He wants to be the friend that will take our hand. If there's anything I've said here today about any of this, you've got a question for me, you want to pray with me,